Hey guys, it's Jake. Got another video for you today coming from my sort of fieldwork series. Today I want to talk about one of my new favorite drills, which is my bag familiarity drill. Um, this particular drill is not necessarily one that you're using to improve form or technique or get in a lot of reps. It's sort of a lightweight fieldwork session that you can do prior to going out to play a tournament, or playing a bigger round or something where you just want to kind of check in with yourself, gain some confidence, make sure you know how your discs are going to work. Um, and that's primarily what I do. Every time I have a tournament coming up, I don't like to play a lot of discs the day or two before. I kind of want to let my body rest, so I'll maybe go do this drill once or twice just to kind of make sure that I'm feeling everything's dialed in. But that's about it. Um, so yeah, the general overview of the drill is pretty simple. You're going to pick a target at whatever your max distance that you would normally throw on a course. And you're going to take your bag and you pull out your discs that you would normally throw at that range. And you're going to throw them on those same lines that you would typically throw them. And you're going to try to, land the discs near the target as you can. Then you're going to pick up your bag. You're going to move closer to the target to the next, whatever, couple 20, 30 feet or whatever it is, and you're going to pull out your next set of discs that you'd be comfortable throwing from that range. You can throw it on those ones on those lines. And you just, going to keep doing this, slowly moving towards the target um, until you eventually have emptied your entire bag and you've gotten a feel for all of your discs. And the key here is to make sure that they all fly as you would expect. You don't have any surprises. Sometimes if have swapped in some backup discs, or maybe you recently smacked the crap out of some trees, and so you just don't know if your discs are gonna, have altered in flight a little bit. It can be great for sort of working out those issues and making sure there's nothing too surprising when you get to your first round of the tournament or something. So I've got some video to go with this. It's a slightly smaller version of the drill. I took out most of the discs, especially the long distance discs from my bag, just because we don't need to see me throwing 25 plus discs or whatever. You'll get the idea of the drill with less than that. And also, I was planning on playing some shorter courses coming up anyway, so I didn't really need those longer range discs. So this is more of like a fairways and below sort of uh, chunk of my bag. Um, but yeah, so I'll walk you through one version of this drill with me, and that should probably give you a pretty good idea of how to take it on yourself. So just to start off here, you can see this is the bag they'll be using. I just have the disc here in the bottom, and there was a pretty decent headwind in this scenario, which is good with this drill. It's nice to have a little bit of wind. It gives you a chance to throw into the headwind and then coming back with the tailwind, so that you can make sure your discs work in both the extremes. Um, so it's pretty much the way I prefer it. So yeah, 10 to 15 mile an hour headwind, a little gusty at times. So a lot of these discs are going to fly a little bit more understable than maybe they normally would. Um, and odds are I'll sky a few out because I've had really rough issues with headwinds and my angle control lately. So it's also good for showing off some of that stuff that I need to work on. And yeah, just sort of helping me figure out what I need to work on some more. So here we go. We'll start out. So we're at 360 feet from the target, and I'm going to let this play a little bit so it can focus. Um, so you can see this tree right here. This is my target at 360 feet, just right at this ball field here. Um, and so with the Tesla, the way I would approach hitting this target is I would start it wide to the right and let it crash in, because the Tesla's got a pretty strong fade. Um, and I know I can trust it to not turn over in a headwind. So I'd probably throw this with, you know, pretty flat as far as like I'm not going to start it on a hyzer or anything, and it'll still have plenty of overstability to fade back over to the left. So see how it comes out. And I apologize for the let's see, it comes in. I apologize for the sky. The video is a little bit blown out, and so the discs are really hard to see once they cross above this tree line. Um, so you kind of just got to watch for it coming in here. But it does come and kind of slide in over here and end up directly next to the tree. So I was pretty happy with that. That's exactly what I expected. Um, I never really have any concerns with my Teslas. They've been one of the most reliable discs ever. So pretty happy with that. Moving along, we've got the Bendy Bolt. So the Bendy Bolt, this is one of the big reasons I want to do this drill. Um, this disc has been great. It's been so straight, especially in headwinds. Um, and I was very reliant on it in a previous tournament, and so I decided to pick up a couple other neutron volts of the same, run without the bendy stamp, uh, just so I could have some backups. And I was throwing those in the last tournament I was in, and actually had some issues with them flipping over. So I've lost a little bit of confidence in this disc, and I've swapped those other neutron volts out and put bendy back in, just to see if this one is still as straight as I remember, and the other ones were just a little bit flippier, or what. So in throwing this one, especially into this headwind, I'm curious to see if it's going to try to turn over at all, or if it's just going to stay pretty straight like I remember. Um, so yeah, that's sort of the goal with this shot here. And the volt tends to have a little bit less fade, so I'd throw it more straight at the basket. And that one did come out a little early, started way too far left of the target. I'd probably wanted it to be more aiming here, and it was probably aiming here. But it didn't turn in the first part of the flight from what we could see, which was nice. It did just fade out here, hit the tree, and drop to the ground, which, that was just a bad shot. But the part that I was interested in, the verifying that it's not going to turn over, that part seemed to be confirmed, and so that was really great to see, and it's really the point of the drill here. It was, bad shot's a bad shot, but it was just good to see the one thing that I was looking for did seem to hold true. So next up we have a crave. I've been really liking these craves lately. I wouldn't normally throw the crave into a headwind like this, so this is kind of awkward. Normally I would throw the volt because the volt and the crave are very similar, but the volt's going to be a better wind fighter. So into this headwind, if I had to throw it, I would probably throw it about the same range, this 360, maybe a little less than this. Um, but I'd throw it on a little bit more of a hyzer to get a similar flight. So I'd throw it a little bit up to the right side on a bit of a hyzer, hoping it'll pop up to flat, and then the crave has a little bit less fade, so I'd expect it to glide out a little bit longer. So I'd maybe want to start a little bit further right, more like the Tesla um, as far as line goes. So we'll see how this comes out, but this is definitely not my disc of choice for a headwind. And I kind of popped that one up, so it was, but it did end exactly where I was aiming. So with that one, I started on the hyzer, but with the headwind, it really popped up. I probably had a little bit of nose up that didn't help it, but um, yeah, so it kind of went up, stalled out, and ended up cruising back, and it hit the landing zone. Um, but that's just not a comfortable shot for me. I probably would not choose to throw that disc in this situation. So this was more of experimentation than anything. So what would happen was when I come back the other direction, that same sort of shot, uh, I would say the opposite about the volt. Like I probably wouldn't throw the volt in a tailwind situation at 360 feet because it's just going to flex out so hard. So it's kind of not a great experiment, but the crave coming back would be perfect because I would be throwing it in that slight tailwind scenario. So yeah, some of the time the disc you're throwing is you don't have a line that you would typically throw it on. So it's at that point you're just kind of seeing what would happen. Like if you have a really flippy roller disc, probably not going to throw it into a headwind, but you might as well throw it anyway just to kind of see, how quick will it turn over? How steep can you throw the hyzer? So yeah, that's sort of my thoughts on the Crave here. It didn't really fly well, but that's what I would expect because I wouldn't throw that disc in this scenario. So um, it came out well, coincidentally, but yeah, it's not the choice for this particular shot. Moving along. All right, last sort of longer distance shot. So I did leave one photon in the bag. This is my super overstable cosmic neutron photon. This guy is really nice for the super strong headwinds or skip shots or anything that's got to cut back left really hard. And actually, at this range, I would consider throwing this disc on a super strong Annie, as hard as I could kind of shot, to get around something and have it fade back really hard left at the end. So that's sort of what I'm aiming for here. I'm going to throw it super hard off to the right on a steep Annie, and hopefully it won't come back too far left. But we'll see. I started on a pretty good Annie. Probably could have gone a little bit steeper. And yeah, it sort of cruises out over here to the left. Um, so yeah, did end up coming back a lot further left. So I either needed to start it on more Annie, um, or start it further to the right or something. But I wouldn't say that's a super common shot that I would do with that disc, but there's not a lot of shots that I do outside of utility things with that disc, so I'm not too concerned with it not flying exactly where I expected. Um, but it's just good to know. All right, so now we've moved up to 330 feet, a little bit closer. And first thing I'm going to throw is a relay. I really like the relay at this distance because it's not going to turn over too hard. If I were to try to throw this, I could probably throw it at 360, but it's going to definitely turn over a lot more and be more of a roller at that range, I would imagine. It's definitely not going to fight back out. So at 330, I can throw it on a bit of a hyzer flip in a headwind. Is I don't often throw a relay in a headwind, but in this scenario, if I throw it kind of steep up in the air, it'll it'll hyzer flip up to the peak and then kind of stall out and come back left. Um, I also really like to do that to get around certain corners where I want to start it on a steep hyzer, kind of have it pop up around the corner, flatten out, and ride a bit. So we'll see. We'll see what happens here at 330. Um, again, starting a little bit off to the right on a hyzer, hoping it'll pop up. And so there it goes. It flattens out. You can't see it because the sky is so bright, unfortunately. But it did turn over just a little bit and stalled out, and yep, just came up a little short. So that's pretty much what I'd be looking for into this headwind. Um, again, it's not a super common shot that I'd throw, the relay into a headwind like this, but Um, I have done it a time or two for a very specific shot line, and that seemed to work out for me. Next up, I got a couple of reactors. This first one is my Eclipse 2.0 reactor. This thing has been so overstable since the day I got it. Um, way more overstable than my other reactors. And so I'm just sort of curious to see if I, try to throw this really, really hard. Is it going to turn over at all? Is it going to fade super hard still? Just still trying to get a feel for how this disc works. Um, so we'll see here. And that turned over, which was really surprising based on what I've seen of this disc. And I don't know if you noticed the little bit of camera shake there. It was gusting pretty hard at that point. So, it was probably a 20-mile-an-hour headwind when I threw that. But that still surprised me that it turned at all. That in general, reactors are pretty stable when it comes to the turn, and that one in particular has been really stable. So that did surprise me a little bit, and I kind of want to throw it some more. Um, it's maybe a little surprising in a good way because I would love to see that become a little bit less overstable. Um, but I just did not expect that line, and that's why this drill is nice. You can kind of find things like that before you get out on the course. Um, I did recently take that disc out and play in the woods, and it took some pretty good abuse. So there is a chance that it did beat in a bit, or gouge out a little bit because of that. So that could be part of it. But yeah, that one was probably the first really surprising throw of the day, um, which also made that end up coming a really short. Didn't get any skip and just sort of stopped, you know, a bit outside the circle for sure. Um, so yeah, next up we have another reactor. This is just a standard neutron one. This is the most beat up one that I currently have. I lost my previous yellow one somewhere. Hopefully it comes back to me. But this one I expected to be a little bit more understable. Um, so we'll see how it compares to that previous glow reactor. And that's very straight, all the way to the ground. That's really confusing for me because that one should have turned a little bit. I mean, reactors don't tend to turn over much at all, but if the glow one turned, you definitely expect this neutron one that's been beat up to turn. Granted that the gusts weren't as strong at that point, but it is just really weird to see those two act that way. Um, However, the fact that it has no fade, that gives me the sign that this thing is beating in nicely, because that's pretty much your, when you think of a reactor, when it beats in, it doesn't usually turn a whole lot. It just loses all of its fade, sort of like an Envy. An Envy never, at least a premium plastic Envy, doesn't tend to gain much turn. It just loses all the fade and becomes really, really straight. Um, versus like a buzz, for instance. Whenever I used to beat in my buzzes, they'd gain that little bit of turn and lose the fade, both sort of. I feel like these discs are just more one than the other. So, at any rate, those two, the reactors were probably the most interesting throws of this particular pass. And so I'll probably come back around and try throwing those again just to see if it was a fluke or if those are really uh, having those different flight patterns now. Next up, we have an Envy. So we've moved to 300 feet, and now I'm throwing an Envy. This is my brand new Eclipse 2.0 Envy, and it's so far when I've thrown it, it's felt really overstable, similar to that Eclipse Reactor that we just saw. So in this case, I am sort of doing the same. I want to verify how, if I really crank on this thing into a headwind, how's it going to react? So we'll see what happens here. And it's up and just a gentle, slow glide off to the left. That was pretty much what I expected. That's more of what I expected out of that glow reactor too. Um, but this Envy, and granted, I did pop the Envy up a little higher, so it didn't have the same low line drive to give it a chance to turn over. But it definitely didn't seem like it was going to turn over at any point during that flight. Um, and it just has that nice consistent fade at the end. So I was pretty happy with that. It flew sort of exactly how I expected it to. It'll be interesting to see how long it takes to beat that guy in to get it to lose a little bit more of that fade so it can hold that long straight flight a little bit longer. Kind of like we'll see hopefully with this disc coming up. Um, but yeah, pretty happy overall with that throw. Um, so this is another Envy. This is an Electron soft. This used to actually be my main putter. Um, but this one is going to be more of the straight flight, hopefully. So it shouldn't really have much turn, but it also should have lost pretty much all the fade at this point. Um, so that's what I would expect. I'll throw this pretty much straight at the target, and it should stay pretty much dead straight the whole time. Fairly straight, and just a tiny little fade at the end. So that's pretty much perfect. That's exactly what I was hoping for. Here we've got another Envy. This is my Cosmic Neutron Soft that's a little bit more beat up. This one's starting to get a little bit warped. So this one should turn over a tiny bit. It's going to be the closest to the numbers here, the 3, 3, -1, 2. well, I guess maybe not the 2. It should have lost pretty much all the fade at this point, but it's gained the turn. The -1 turn should be pretty apparent. So if I throw this straight at the target, it should just sort of drift off to the right and maybe fade back, maybe not. It's hard to say, especially in this headwind, but we'll see. Straight at the target and drifting back to the right. And a little bit of fade at the end. So yeah, it's still pretty straight, but it definitely did have more turn than the previous one. And my last envy here, this is my super beat up Electron Soft. Um, this one's pretty flippy. Again, I would never throw this in a headwind like this. It makes no sense. It would probably turn into a roller most of the time. But sort of like the relay, if I throw it on a steep highs or kind of pop it up high, it'll go up, turn, definitely flatten out, maybe turn over a little bit, and then sort of stall out and come back left. So not a terribly useful shot, but it's just kind of good to verify that, if I were to throw it in a headwind, is it going to do what I think it's going to do? There we go. Hyzer flips up, comes a little bit to the right, and then starts fading out nicely, and yeah, ends up left of target. So it actually faded pretty far over there. Next up, 300 feet. This one is another experiment, actually. I don't normally throw this guy backhand very often. This is more of a 150-foot sort of chip shot, flick up shot sort of disc for me. But every once in a while, there's like a 250, 300-foot hole that just doglegs hard left, where the NV, or at least a more beat up NV, is not going to cut the corner quite as tight. I probably could get away with it with that Eclipse Glow one currently, but eventually it'll beat in to be a little bit straighter, and this one should give me a pretty similar. It'll be a little bit, maybe a little bit more overstable than that NV was, um, still, but it'll maintain that for its life. So yeah, we'll see if I can get this thing to sort of go straight for maybe half the flight, and then it should just dump pretty hard left. I even started on a tiny bit of Annie, and it definitely came out and just dumped left. So that's exactly the kind of flight I'd expect and want out of that disc. I probably should have waited and thrown that one when I was a little bit closer, and also I should have thrown it off to the right if I was actually trying to aim towards the target. I kind of just got focused on the line I wanted, more than where I was throwing it to. So it was not the greatest of shots, but it flew exactly how I wanted it to. So I was pretty happy with that. So last up here we got the Pyro. The Pyro is a disc that I tend to throw on forehand flexes more than anything. Occasionally I'll throw a backhand spike Kaiser with it, but um, at, at 300 feet, if I were to throw this, it's probably going to be a forehand flex shot or a scramble shot of some kind. So yeah, this will probably be the only forehand that you'll see on this particular run, but we'll see how it comes out. Gentle flex, and it comes back, skips towards the target, pretty much perfect. That's exactly what I expect out of that. All right, so now we've moved up to 250 feet. This is sort of the last point at which I'd be full sending any disc. Um, Anything closer than this, and you're talking about taking power off or throwing steep spikes or something else to sort of mitigate the distance. Um, so all I have left are my putting pilots, which I would technically probably throw right around this range. I'd maybe lean towards an NV if I could, and sort of throw it on a spike. But if I had to throw straight at the target, I would probably pull out these pilots and throw them. So these I'm pretty much gonna throw them directly at the target. They should have limited turn and fade, pretty straight discs, just sort of glide straight at the target. So let's see this first one. This is a little bit more overstable, so this one should have a tiny bit of fade, and it does. It just sort of gently holds that slight hyzer it started on. This one's a little bit more beat up, so this one might turn over a tiny bit at 250. And it's pretty straight. Oh, there it is. A little bit of turn. So that's pretty much exactly what I expected out of those. So at this point, my bag is now empty. And I'd walk up and I would collect all my discs. And as you can see, they're all, you know, I got a putt on a lot of these, so I was pretty happy with how most of these came out. I obviously got them to fly how I sort of expected them to because they ended up near the tree. So um, at this point, I gather up all my discs. I would probably, you know, grab my rangefinder and look back the other way, find a target that's around 360 feet or so, or maybe a little further since it's a tailwind, and I'd start the process over again. And I maybe only do this 3 or 4 times at most because the point, like I said, is not to, you know, throw your arm out doing this drill, right? It's just to make sure that there's no surprises in your bag. Um, and yeah, that's pretty much it. It's just a nice drill to give you a little bit of peace of mind going into your next round. Um, so yeah, if you have any comments or if you have any similar drills, I'd love to hear about them. Feel free to throw those below. Um, Otherwise, in the near future, I'm hoping to get some more videos out, probably some more reviews next. I'd like to do a review of the Crave, the Volt, the Trace, the Pilot, maybe a Drift or a Lift, something like that. As well as I'd like to get a couple more field work videos in, maybe some course walkthroughs or something out, maybe something new. Um, it's just been, unfortunately, it's been really crappy weather lately. It's been just cold and windy and wet this spring, so it's been hard to get out and get film. And then when it is nice, I'm generally trying to practice and play and tournaments on the weekends and things like that. So it's just been hard to get a lot of film. So hopefully we'll pick up and have a little bit more content as we move more into the summer and the weather is a little bit more cooperative. Um, but yeah, so if you're interested in, seeing any of that content, feel free to subscribe. And yeah, we'll catch you in the next one.